Welcome to PerfPod, your go-to podcast for everything related to performance management. Whether you're a student or a seasoned professional, you'll find valuable insights and updates here. PerfPod episodes will be short, snappy, and are particularly targeted at ACCA students studying for performance management or advanced performance management exams. They'll include technical content, exam techniques, and real-world applications, giving you the best chance to pass these two tricky exams. I'm your host, Richard Guyver, also known as the Dentist Accountant. Today we're diving into two decision rules, Maximax and Maximin, and they're both in the PM and the APM syllabuses. There are also two other decision rules, but we'll look at those on the next podcast, and that's expected value and minimax regret. So you must remember we're talking about risk, not uncertainty, and be sure you know the difference, which was covered on the previous podcast. Now these are called decision rules for a reason. It's because we need to make a decision. That might sound silly, but some people do get thrown by this when answering questions. So the scenario typically is we have to make a decision now, but the outcome of that decision will be impacted by a future event which is outside of our control. However, we have statistical data and can predict what the impact will be, and this is why it's related to risk and not uncertainty. If we continue with the previous example of an ice cream vendor, let's assume this vendor can stock enough for 1,000 ice creams, and assume that these are perishables that can only be used on that one day. And if the weather's good, they'll sell 1,000 ice creams. If it's raining, they'll only sell 100, and if it's dry but overcast, they'll sell 250. The decision to be made is whether to stock 1,000 ice creams, or to stock 250 ice creams, or to stock 100 ice creams. So make sure you're clear on that. The decision is how much to stock. The weather is outside of their control, and I can't emphasize that enough. And then we draw up a decision table showing probably something like the profit and loss. If they stocked 1,000 and the weather was sunny, they stocked 1,000 and it was overcast, they stocked 1,000 and it was raining. And then we do the same again if they stocked 250 for each of those three weathers, and again if they stocked 100 for each of those three weathers. And that's your decision table. And a Maximax decision maker is a risk seeker, so they will look at that decision table and they will choose the best possible result, i.e. the highest profit. The limitation of Maximax is it doesn't consider probability, and it's often over-optimistic. And if I give an example of two projects, I appreciate these are extreme examples, but if project 1 has a 98% chance of making £100,000 and a 2% chance of making £1,000, and then another project has a 6% chance of making £102,000 and a 94% chance of making £1,000, a Maximax decision maker would choose the second one because they're not taking probability into account, and that's one of the key limitations of Maximax. And in terms of calculating, it's normally the easiest one. It's really just choosing the highest, i.e. the best outcome. And next is the Maximin decision rule, and this is the decision rule that would be used by risk-averse people. What they're looking to do is maximising the minimum profits. The downside is, as with Maximax, there's no probability taken into account, and it's often seen as too conservative. And the way to calculate it is, again, you look at that decision table, you look at the worst outcome for each of the options, i.e. the minimum profit, and then you take the biggest of those, so it's the best of the worst. I'm not really going to try and talk about how to draw up the table because that's not really suitable for a podcast, but in performance management you're quite likely to be asked to do those calculations. In APM it would be unlikely or rare to be asked. I think often now they would be given to you, and it's more about interpreting those results. A little exam technique tip: it would be very unusual for Maximax and Maximin to lead to the same decision. It can happen in real life, but if you were to see that in an exam, it might be worth a quick reasonability check if that happens. And what I mean by reasonability check is, when I was doing my maths GCSE exams 30 years ago, I would often apply this. It's exactly as it sounds. Ask yourself a question: does my answer seem reasonable? So for example, when I made up the scenario earlier about selling 1,000 ice creams, I was assuming in my head that's 8 hours a day, which is selling 2 ice creams per minute, one every 30 seconds. That's a busy day, but it is possible. Had I chosen 5,000 ice creams, that would mean 1 every 6 seconds. That doesn't seem reasonable. And so you should always try and question the reasonableness, particularly of calculations. But, and this is really important, don't blow your time management in checking. You probably, if you have made a mistake and you correct it, you might get 1, possibly 2 marks improvement, and it's certainly not worth sacrificing 3, 4 or 5 elsewhere. And remember, in an exam you can flag on the bottom, I think it's on the bottom right, there's a little flag which lets you to come back to that later on if you need to. So in summary, we've looked at the 2 decision rules, Maximax and Maximin. We've looked at who would use them, with risk seekers choosing Maximax and risk averse choosing Maximin. Next time we're going to look at 2 other decision rules, which is minimax regret, which is also one that a risk averse organisation or person would choose, and we're going to look at expected values. So thanks very much for tuning in to PerfPod. I hope you found this episode informative. As always, I'd love to receive feedback in the comments, and remember, if you do have any topics that you want me to record on a future podcast, please do say so in the comments. And if you have any colleagues or friends who you think might find these useful, please share. Until next time, this is PerfPod signing off.